This is iPhone 14 Pro Max. Over the last few years, purchasing Apple's top-tier iPhone meant purchasing the Pro variant. You need a Pro iPhone if you want the best cameras, display and battery life. For 2023, the greatest iPhones are the iPhone 14 Pro and iPhone 14 Pro Max, which isn't very different from last year. Hello everyone, I'm Prajul Nepali and welcome to 360 Reviews. Apple's most recent Pro phones are immensely happy to include features like the dynamic island, a new 48-megapixel camera, and an always-on screen. The iPhone 14 Pro Max builds on the strengths of 14 Pro while also going above and beyond by introducing a more immersive display and significantly longer battery life. The iPhone 14 Pro Max is the pinnacle of flagship smartphones if you're okay with the greater price and slight increase in weight. It's enormous, expensive, potent, and totally overdone in all the best ways. The design of the iPhone 14 Pro Max is very identical to that of iPhone 13 Pro Max from last year, or more specifically, the iPhone 12 Pro Max. Apple has continued to use the same basic design aesthetic for the past few years, and although this may not make the iPhone 14 Pro Max visually groundbreaking, there isn't much to be critical of in the tried and true style. The frosted glass back looks and feels amazing, the stainless steel frame is opulent, and the buttons and haptic feedbacks are as wonderful as you would expect. The fit and quality on the majority of the modern smartphone is good, but the iPhone 14 Pro Max still feels superior. Size is the only distinguishing feature of the Pro Max, which is one of the heaviest phones you can buy at 240 grams. Making the switch to the iPhone 14 Pro Max at first felt pretty frightening for someone who prefers smaller phones and has been using an iPhone 13 Pro for over a year. After using it for almost a week, I'm delighted to report that switching to the phone as my primary handset hasn't been as challenging as I had anticipated. Indeed, the iPhone 14 Pro Max is still a hefty and big smartphone. It will always be too big for some individuals to utilize comfortably. Yet, I've gotten to the point where I can move it with one hand and am accustomed to its weight. In exchange for putting up with the iPhone 14 Pro Max enormous size, you receive two key advantages. The first is a huge 6.7-inch display. With a resolution of 2796 by 1290 pixels, the OLED panel has the same 460 pixel density as the smaller iPhone 14 Pro. The screen of the 14 Pro Max is of the same high caliber as that on the iPhone 14 Pro. The screen is now brighter than ever, the colors are vibrant and lovely, and the text is effortless to read. You can expect a maximum brightness of 1000 nits in most situations, but the iPhone 14 Pro Max can reach a maximum brightness of 2000 nits when additional light is required, such as an intense sunshine. You shouldn't even have an issue seeing the phone outside, not even on the sunniest of the days. The 120Hz promotion refresh rate Apple debuted on the iPhone 13 Pro series is also retained in the iPhone 14 Pro Max, providing you with incredibly fluid animations anytime you interact with the device. One of the fastest and smoothest phones I have tested this year results from this plus iOS 16's fluid design. This is also one of the first iPhones with an always-on display, a darkened version of your lock screen with alerts, lock screen widgets, and the full color of your wallpaper is now visible when you press the power button to turn off the display on your iPhone. Although I have never been a huge fan of always-on screens, I must confess that Apple's version is among the most attractive I've ever seen. Album art is displayed when playing music and the lock screen feels more alive than ever thanks to the subtle animation that play when the screen is turned on and off. Even though I wear an Apple Watch every day, I don't find the entire thing to be especially useful. Still, I'm delighted Apple finally made the switch to always-on functionality. All of these features are available on the iPhone 14 Pro as well. The display on the iPhone 14 Pro Max isn't actually any different. It just provides you extra space to play with that amazing display. Everything on the iPhone 14 Pro Max feels bigger and more spacious, including the playing games, scrolling through Twitter, viewing YouTube videos, and surfing websites on Safari. Although the 6.1-inch display on the iPhone 14 Pro is clearly not small, having a 6.7-inch canvas to work with every day has been a pleasure. The Dynamic Island. Despite its silly name, is one of the most intriguing iPhone features I've ever seen in a very long time, and it makes me want to see what Apple will do with it. Have a song playing? As you swipe up to go home, your music app floats into the Dynamic Island to display the album cover and a waveform that matches the color of what is now playing. The Dynamic Island lets you set a timer and shows a live countdown so you can easily keep track of it. The Dynamic Island also displays Face ID prompts, device charging notification, AirPods connection pop-ups, incoming calls and call controls, Apple Maps directions, and much more. All of these alerts have always been there on the iPhone, but the Dynamic Island offers them a unified, convenient home. Along with streamlining iOS numerous warnings, this feature also lends them a pleasant, whimsical quality that is just too darn enduring. Even though the Dynamic Island isn't constantly active, it's a delight when an app does use it. The Dynamic Island has only one flaw in my opinion. I wish it were capable of more. The feature's present use is limited to a few system alerts and music playback, but that ought to change soon enough. Third-party applications like Lyft, Uber, ESPN, Starbucks, and others will be able to develop their own uses for the Dynamic Island when Apple introduced the Live Activities API with iOS 16.1 later this year. The Dynamic Island should get pretty entertaining at that point, and I can't wait to see how it plays out. For the last few years, Apple's cameras have been top-notch, and the iPhone 14 Pro Max makes things even better. Since the iPhone 6s, Apple has only used 12-megapixel camera sensors, but the new 48-megapixel primary camera on the iPhone 14 Pro and 14 Pro Max features an f1.78 aperture and sensor-shift optical image stabilization. The sensor's increased resolution enables the 48-megapixel primary camera to double as a 2x optical zoom lens. A 12-megapixel telephoto camera with a 3x zoom and a 12-megapixel ultra-wide camera with 120-degree field of view are added to the primary camera. The 12-megapixel front-facing camera, the first with autofocus on an iPhone, is another innovation, and that is only received in terms of hardware. Apple's new photonic engine picture pipeline is used by the iPhone 14 Pro Max in terms of software, providing more vivid colors and wonderfully detailed textures in less light than before. It all sounds extremely great, and after viewing images taken with the iPhone 14 Pro Max, it's clear why Apple is making such a big deal about the camera. In a word, it's fantastic. The 48-megapixel primary camera dependably delivers outstanding pictures whether you are shooting in favorable or unfavorable lighting situation. Rich and brilliant colors are used, but they also do a wonderful job staying true to how a scene truly appeared. The degree of detail you can capture with the primary camera also astounded me. Despite the 14-megapixel photographs from the sensor being pixel binned to 12-megapixel photos, the photos still have very fine details. The realistic depth of field you receive in your photographs is another fantastic benefit of the bigger 48-megapixel camera. Even after the lights are turned out, the 48-megapixel camera still glows. The iPhone 14 Pro Max has no trouble taking images in a poorly lit space. It has little trouble displaying excellent colors, superb detail, and organic bokeh. The iPhone 14 Pro Max captures enough light for a fully functional image even in conditions that are almost completely dark. Even the greatest smartphone cameras, to which the iPhone 14 Pro Max undoubtedly belongs, must sacrifice detail while taking pictures in extremely low light. The 12-megapixel ultra-wide camera, what about it? That is also excellent. Although there is a predictable loss of clarity when compared to the primary camera, it still performs well if you require a broader shot that still looks fantastic. Also, Apple has done a fantastic job minimizing edge distortion, ensuring that these images don't have an unattractive fish-eye look. Yet, this 12-megapixel camera can take more than simply ultra-wide shots. The camera app instantly shifts to a macro mode made possible by the ultra-wide camera when you get the iPhone 14 Pro Max near enough to something. The outcomes are extraordinary. There is also much variety with the macro mode, whether you want to take a closer picture of a flower or want to reveal hidden pictures in a piece of a cloth. Smartphones with poor macro cameras are abundant, but those with good ones are pretty difficult to find. The macro camera on the iPhone 14 Pro Max is one of the finest I have ever used. The 12 megapixel telephoto camera is equally impressive to me. The 30x and 100x zooms you can obtain on a Galaxy S23 Ultra sound far more spectacular than the 3x zoom, at least on paper. But in actual use, it has shown out to be a really useful sensor. The telephoto camera's 3x images let you get considerably closer to your subject while still preserving excellent clarity and vibrant colors. Also, I believe that 3x finds a good balance between bringing the topic near to you without making it appear cluttered. Also, the 48 megapixel primary camera's 2x zoom option has been fantastic for getting up close to your subject while still allowing you to see part of the backdrop. The 12 megapixel selfie camera performs admirably, capturing vivid colors and appealing details as expected. But what truly makes it shine is the autofocus. All previous iPhone selfie camera had fixed focus, which means that they had a predetermined focus point that couldn't be changed. But you may change the focus on the iPhone 14 Pro Max to be much closer or farther away than in previous models. That may seem like a little element, but it has greatly increased the camera's versatility. Every time one of my cats jumps on my lap while I'm working, I adore snapping close-up photographs of them. iOS 16 is installed by default on the iPhone 14 Pro Max. Although there have been a few noticeable changes, Apple's most recent version of iOS is mostly similar to iOS 15. The lock screen is the greatest change in this year's release, as we have covered in great detail. Apple now provides you complete power to alter your lock screen in a variety of ways with iOS 16. You can build different lock screens that you can quickly switch between, modify the clock font, and add widgets. Although the customization interface may be made better, the extra functionality offered by this feature is excellent, and everything looks stunning when shown on the iPhone 14 Pro Max always on screen. The lock screen is in iOS 16's only significant improvement. The weather app now gives you considerably more information than before when you tap on the weather prediction and other statistics. There's also a fantastic photo cutout tool, a battery percentage indicator for the status bar, typing feedback from the keyboard, iMessages, edit unsent choices, and a ton more. Also, the iPhone 14 Pro Max will continue to get new iOS updates for years to come in classic Apple fashion. We anticipate that the iPhone 14 Pro Max will continue to get regular OS and security upgrades for 5 to 6 years after its sale, even if Apple doesn't promise a particular number. With the iPhone, performance is really a source of complaint. That's still true with the iPhone 14 Pro Max, which comes as no surprise. The new A16 Bionic processor from Apple is included in the iPhone 14 Pro and 14 Pro Max. The A16 is quicker and more energy efficient than the A15 since its 4nm design is smaller than the 5nm architecture of the A15. The A16 Bionic has shown to be a performance powerhouse in my taste for every task I threw at it. Apps, they operate well and open right away. Games, each game I have thrown at iPhone 14 Pro Max has worked flawlessly, from Tetris to Call of Duty Mobile. And when you add 6GB of RAM to that, multitasking becomes a seamless and dependable experience. The iPhone 14 Pro Max has never caused me to consider performance. I almost forgot to include this section in my evaluation. The phone simply and completely complied with all of my requests. At this point in the review, it should be clear that the iPhone 14 Pro Max is a superb smartphone. So how does the battery life of its extensive feature set differ? While the battery life of the ordinary iPhone 14 Pro has been very disappointing, the iPhone 14 Pro Max durability has really amazed me. With only 4 hours 17 minutes of screen time and 15% battery life left after using the iPhone 14 Pro Max from 5:45 AM to 11:15 PM, my first day with it wasn't the best. The always on screen was turned on at that time. I saw considerably greater endurance after a few additional days of use to allow the battery break-in. I've used the always on screen for the whole day from 7:45 in the morning to 11:40 at night and still had 37% of battery life. The battery life does, however, improve when the always on screen is turned off. I once had a day that lasted from 7 o'clock morning to 11:26 p.m. evening with always on disabled and still had 37% battery life. It included 5 hours 45 minutes of screen time plus more than 1 hour of background Apple Music streaming. With 32% power left after another day without the always on screen, I made it from 7:55 in the morning to 11:41 at night. Almost 7 hours of screen times were spent on that day, including over 40 minutes on YouTube, over an hour and a half on Twitter, over 30 minutes of internet surfing in Safari, and several other applications. I've never used the iPhone 14 Pro Max down to 15% by the end of the day, and that was even with higher use than usual while evaluating the device. If I use the iPhone 14 Pro Max more frequently, I could easily get through a couple of days on a single charge. The iPhone 14 Pro Max is currently on sale, starting at Rs 2,07,990 for 128 GB of storage. Upgrades to 256 GB, 512 GB and even 1 TB are available. The other variants have price tags of Rs 2,26,990, 2,65,990 and 3,04,990 respectively. Without a doubt, 2023 is a thrilling year for Apple's Pro series of iPhones. With the iPhone 14 Pro and iPhone 14 Pro Max, there's a lot to ponder thanks to the new always-on-screen dynamic island, significant camera enhancement, and A16 Bionic CPU. Yet, if I had to choose between the two, I would say you out to get the latter model this year. The 14 Pro Max improves on the iPhone 14 Pro by having a bigger screen and a substantially longer battery life. It still has all the same outstanding features. The iPhone 14 Pro Max stands out as the greatest iPhone this year if you can get past the fact that it is a huge phone and that is all expensive. So on our 360 scale, the iPhone 14 Pro Max receives a rating of 345. That's all for this video. If you would like to see what Samsung's flagship smartphones has to offer, check out our review of the Samsung Galaxy S23 Plus. If you have enjoyed this video, be sure to like, comment and subscribe our channel. Take care. See ya.